Hello, my name is Jorb. I love gear. I'm coming to you live from Berlin, Superbooth 2024, somewhere between a festival and a trade show. But Superbooth is all about gear. It's all about synthesizers, tools to make electronic music. And the best thing about being here is meeting people. Don't get that twisted. But the second best part is seeing new gear. And I've seen a bunch of things, some I hadn't heard of before, some I'm seeing sort of grow up. But a bunch of things I'm happy exist, I want you guys to know exist, and I think you should keep an eye on. Firstly, thank you to my patrons, who in part are the reason I get to do stuff like this. Really, I pull money out of Patreon once a year to help me pay for this. It's not easy to get here from the Midwest, but having people who support me really makes it possible. So thank you to the patrons. This coverage is also brought to you in part by Pittsburgh Modular, so thank you to them. I will point you to my existing videos on the Taiga keyboard, and the Voltage Lab 2. And if you haven't seen me mention it in the Voltage Lab 2 video, another longer, more detailed one will be coming shortly. So if you're interested in that sort of a thing, stick around and you will certainly get it. So the first thing on my list was the first thing that made me stop. The first thing that I was walking by, I noticed people talking about, or I noticed somebody demonstrating, and I had to stop and ask him immediately. And that's actually the video you'll see now. It's called The Love, or The First Love. I stopped because just the hardware looks so interesting, so different, so unique. Those weird buttons, those 4 knobs, LOVE knobs. But then the screen was so clear and there was so much visual feedback. It is a 4-operator FM synthesizer with this very visual, very hands-on interface. I hope I have good evidence of it in the footage, but you just drag from one circle to the next to make an operator become a modulator to a carrier. And to increase levels or pitch, you just drag on these waveforms. It's really, really cool. But the most impressive part, there's this sort of visual timeline that starts near you and moves farther away, like the Star Wars crawl. And that's how you set up your sort of modulation over time instead of envelopes. So you pick a point on that timeline, you change some parameters. You pick another point on that timeline and change some parameters. And how far apart they are is how long it takes you to get there. And it could just be a lot of one parameter and a little of another. But then you put a third point on the timeline, and you've effectively made like a complex envelope for FM without having to, doing it 100 times better than a DX7. Not only is it cool and interesting to look at, but it turns out it's solving a pretty interesting problem. How do you make setting up FM more intuitive? And based on the little bit of time, I sat and listened to it. I think they've succeeded. So I don't know when it's going to be finished or when you can buy it, but I'll link in the description to them. I'll do that for everybody, certainly the smaller companies, to link in the description so you can find them and see what else they're working on and find out when this cool new stuff is going to be available. So the Love synthesizer, fantastic. Can't wait to see what it becomes. Next up, the Wiggler. The first time I saw this, I was just having a drink after Superbooth. I was sitting in somebody's hotel, and the creator, the inventor of the Wiggler, just sat down and asked if he could show us a prototype. And I've seen it sort of grow up into what is now the Wiggler V3. So, of course, the main idea is these gold plates where you play notes is on this sort of flexor, this sort of almost floating almost floating user interface element. And force in and wiggling left and right are modulations you can assign to all sorts of things. Most commonly and most obviously, force will increase your filter cutoff. It'll open the filter as you push down, and wiggle to pitch as you go left and right. You get this really natural vibrato. It reminds me truly of playing viola. When I was a kid, I played viola. There's such a nuanced relationship between what you're doing with your fingers and what you end up hearing. And this is capturing a lot of that energy, a lot of that vibe. Of course, along with being electronic and having arpeggiators and all sorts of other cool stuff. So my demo was fine. I'll use less of that and more of the guy who came up with it, because he clearly had been practicing. But it's a similar sort of idea to like all these hyper expensive, polyphonic expression and like the Osmos. Like, how do we get more dimensions out of your hand, out of performers? in a smaller, simpler, more straightforward box. And it has CV outs for wiggle and pressure and gate and pitch and all these things. So it could just be, this is my expressive controller for your rack, or it starts, or maybe it's even the voice and your CV is controlling, effects and other things around it. You get what I'm saying? It's very, very cool. I can't wait to see where it ends up. Okay, 2 you won't be surprised by. The Oberheim TE-05, the Thomas Elroy Oberheim 5. It is the Take 5 chassis. Well, it's similar to the Take 5 chassis. I shouldn't say they're the same. And similar to the platform in general. It has the mod matrix, and the arpeggiator and things like that. But it's the Oberheim filter and oscillators that are sort of a more Oberheim flavor, and the way you control them isn't with a mixer, it's just the switches, like in any Oberheim. So it was sort of the logical next step. We had the Prophet 6, then the OB6, the Prophet 5, then the OBX8, the Take 5, and here we are with the TO5. So it's kind of obvious, but I'm still happy that they did it. The Oberheim filter is amazing. It's special. It sounds good. People keep getting excited about it for a reason. So for that to be in a more affordable, not really affordable, but more, I wouldn't call it an affordable synth, but it's more affordable than probably any other Oberheim. I'm happy that they're doing it. It's the right choice, It's the sort of thing that people like me get really, really excited about. And I've been such a Take 5 believer. It's the only synth I've used live for a while. I'm Take 5 pilled, as the kids say. And to see them, recognize that, hey, that was good and we got a lot of things right, and sort of bring a different sound palette to, all those other things they figured out already, I think it's a good call. And then the Polybrute 12. So I try and not get super excited about the mega premium stuff. I often try and make a point that the less expensive stuff is just as good for many people and for many uses. But when you sit at something this sophisticated, this nice, a true analog flagship, it's awesome. And I'm excited that things like it exist, And I tried the original, also at stuff like this. I never had one. I think I'm more curious about the 12, literally because 12 Voices seems like it should be what you have on a big, expensive flagship, The big innovation was full touch, so the whole range of the key, barely pressing it, registers the note and is a modulation until you bottom out, and then it's aftertouch. Both are polyphonic, along with the Morphe on the left side. So there's so many, and the touch strip, the sort of ribbon controller in the middle. There's so many opportunities for expression, combined with that huge, kind of cool to use mod matrix on the grid. It's probably the most interesting sort of flagship to me for 100 reasons. I'm happy I got to try it, and it sounds and feels good because it has to sound and feel good to be that premium, but I'm really happy I sat down and played with it. I didn't think I was going to focus on smaller manufacturers, but sitting down and trying it was awesome. So awesome. Not the opposite, but sort of to contrast. So Arturia, big company, how about we just make the best, biggest, most sophisticated analog thing we can? Korg Berlin specifically, is working on this electroacoustic thing. It's got tines that you sort of strike with electromagnets, which is crazy. That's it, yes. These. So cool. And so by the nature of it, it's fixed to these notes, right? You can pick out different harmonics, but these tines are always going to resonate at these notes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think this is so cool.
But you could put an analog filter on it so that you could
And, you know, it's this physical thing. It reminds me of electric piano so much. And I saw the prototype last year, and they've sort of evolved a little bit to what it is this year. And it's just out of nowhere. It's completely different from anything I've ever seen. And I love that they're working on it. I don't know if the demo will be any good. Thank you, Dave, for recording the bits that you did. It was either him, Dave Hillowitz, or Oscillator Sync said it sounded like a gamelan, which I thought was a great pull because it really does in a lot of situations. But you can strike it, or you have envelopes faded in and have it feedback. You can open up the VCA on every one of the tines and introduce a lot of like sympathetic frequencies. It's such a fascinating thing, and I'm really curious to see what it looks like when it is finally a product. I talked about this last year, and I'm sure I said a lot of the same stuff, but it's cool for a big company to have such a open sort of research and development process. And I know Korg Berlin is not, Korg at large, but for them to be doing this like this is really, really cool to see. Okay, and last up we have two sort of very different approaches to granular. First is the Groc, G-R-O-C. I don't know the name of the company. I just know the synthesizer is called the Groc. But the visual interface, you see the waveform, you see the sample player, and as you manipulate modulations, grain parameters, you see that reflected in a way that is valuable information. It's got some clever choices for the mod matrix. They had this envelope that was described to me as moving the tape head around individual grains. You can have some consistency per key press, sort of a more controlled approach to what is so cool about granular, the movement. And I only saw it because one of the guys stopped me and said, "Hey, I think you'll think this was cool," and he was completely right. But I like the form factor, I like the ideas, I like the visual feedback, I like the implementation of modulation. So the Groc is definitely on my radar. Again, I don't know when it's going to come out or when it's going to be available, but you can find all of that info at some link in the description. I promise. Sort of, not a flip side, but sort of parallel to that, another approach to granular processing is the Tempera from BeetleCrab, the same people who made the vector synth. I love the vector synth, and one of the first things we talked about when they sent me an email way back was the appreciation of my use of oscilloscopes to sort of provide visual feedback for what it is I was talking about. And something we talked about today was that visuals don't just have to be pretty, they have to be useful, which is what I thought about vector, and really what I think about Tempera. Generally, each vertical column is a different sample. Can you guys hear the concert that's going on outside? That's Berlin. But generally, on Tempera, the vertical columns are different samples, and each sort of bracket vertically, and each sort of vertical pad is a different time in that sample. And when you decide what's playing, they call it emitters, but they have a spread X and a spread Y, and perhaps that emitter will spray up into a different time in the same sample, perhaps it'll spray over into another lane and play a different sample. And I got examples of it doing melodic stuff and examples of it doing rhythmic stuff. And even with just that simple understanding of what the grid meant, it immediately became obvious what was cool about this, what was powerful about this. And it's a totally different approach to something like the Groc. Will attract a different user, will end up being useful for different people, but that's sort of what's cool about granular right now, is so many different people are trying to figure out what makes a good interface for it. And that's kind of a good way to segue out of this. Like, so much of what you see at Superbooth, certainly from smaller companies, is people trying to come up with something new, a new way of interacting with something, a new way of making sound, a new way of approaching, or bringing concepts we understand, or putting them in an instrument that's unique and valuable for some reason. And to see all these passionate people working hard on stuff they're really proud of, I find it very, very inspiring. And I'm really, really proud to be here and in some way be a part of what is so clearly so important to so many people. I'm really, really grateful to be able to talk to these people about, for a lot of them, it's their life's work. And I really appreciate and respect that passion, and I'm grateful that I get to be a part of it. To me, demonstrating stuff or sharing ideas, I'm so lucky to be able to do that, and I hope in part I get to enable creativity for other people. That's really why I do any of this. And this Superbooth, all these events really, but Superbooth is a flashpoint. It's a chance for me to step back and think about my role in all of that. So thank you, oh viewer. I get to be here because you appreciate what I do, and I'm only here because I appreciate what other people have done, what people who make these instruments, design these instruments, make music with these instruments are accomplishing and are proud to be doing. So thank you. So that's it. I'm very, very grateful to be here. Superbooth forever. My name's Jorb. I love gear. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.